We cannot underestimate in this case the power of everybody that's been harmed by things like the loss of Uniswap, the loss of OKX, and of course the harm to our price. We can't ignore that, and I hope every Hexagon and Pulsechain will sign this amicus brief petition when it's ready, and I hope to have it ready sooner rather than later, so that by time Richard finally does answer the complaint, maybe we have at least 3,000 to 5,000 signers, because that's a lot. They have at least one victim. Who knows? Maybe it's Cleo. I don't know if he's in the state of New York.
So that's essentially what holding Pulse and Hex and Pulsex is. It's a call option on Richard Hart not going to jail. Because, like, let's just look at the percentages, right? Yeah, maybe the XRP's case gets overturned, but if you're just going purely on an arithmetic, quantitative actuarial table model, probably not going to get overturned, and it's going to at least be the law of the land for like the next year or two, right? But
5 years.
Yeah, so like it might be the law of land for during the whole time of this Richard Hart case. So that's and 75% chance that the appeal is not going to be overturned. I understand the arguments that it will, and like what the hell, they couldn't prove XRP was a security. Mind blowing that they couldn't. So, but it's the federal judge has now written this in ink. So that's like good. That would go in the check if you were separating the case for good, not good for Richard Hart and the Hexagons. That goes on the side of good. Good stuff for the Hexagons.
Yep. Hey guys, I want to start off by saying thanks for bringing Cleo on, because I, for one, feel much more reassured knowing that that's kind of the quality of the opposition we're facing here. I mean, host, you gave the guy several attempts to clarify as to what his beef is with Richard Hart, and the only thing I was able to hear from him is that he accused Richard Hart of being charismatic. I mean, if I convince you that blue is better than red, you can make the case that I manipulated you into believing that blue is better than red. So anyways, I didn't, given 5 minutes, the guy couldn't define what his problem was with Richard Hart.
Well,
so I kind of feel a little
better. Hold on. He lost money. That's his problem. He lost money. Which is a valid point. People
but I did not hear him say that. I heard you saying that on his behalf. All I heard from him is that Richard Hart was charismatic and has opinions. I heard you say that.
Well, hang on. Let's just slow it down there, but I totally get where you're coming from, and appreciate that. But yeah,
before we move on, I also want to put another good thing in the checkbox of the Hexagons is that usually, and Fidgetal, I would like you to argue with this if you can. I don't think you can though. Usually, when a criminal case is brought in financial markets, especially crypto, like if you look at Mashinsky, Do Kwon, it's brought in conjunction with the SEC case. And the criminal case is brought usually when there's a bunch of people with pitchforks that want to burn the person at the stake. With Terra and Celsius, there were a lot of people, with pitchforks. With this case, I don't see a lot of pitchforks. And more importantly, I would say potentially most importantly, it's unlikely that a criminal case will be brought. I understand the potential for a criminal case. There was no criminal case brought in parallel with the SEC suit. And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there's been a time in crypto where the SEC has brought a case and then a criminal case came later. I want to be corrected on that. I think this is kind of the most important thing for the community to look at is what is the percentage of times the SEC's brought a case and then a criminal case came later. It did not come in parallel with it. And I'm betting that more than 90% of the time, potentially 100, but as a lawyer, I don't like speaking in absolutes. So 90%, if you get like a 90 in school, you get like an A-. So A- percentage of the time, a criminal case is never brought if it's not brought in parallel with the SEC.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And
I would really want to see if anybody has an example, though, of a criminal case being brought not in conjunction with an SEC case.
Brandon, the answer will likely be how Richard Hart plays ball. So they file these civilly because they want to make a point. This is a dance. This is not real law happening. They don't want real law to happen because they don't want case law. So what you're looking at is a dance. So Ripple played the dance like a fucking G. And that's why the SEC got the worst fucking news they could ever get, which is case law. And case law against them. And by the way, if you had half a brain, you would have made 100x just by understanding the basic law. If he settles, which is what they want, he won't go to jail. If he puts a fucking fight, watch criminal charges come.
For sure, and I resonate with that for sure. But that's again, that's probably why he's chilling in Finland.
Wait,
he's not just Swedish; he's Finnish as well.
Tell us your opinion on the likelihood of settlement and when it's going to come, because we have seen Richard talk about oh, EOS settled for 24 million on raising over $1 billion. I think he understands it's in the community's best interest to settle. Is the SEC incentivized to settle, or do they want to? Because usually they want to make an example out of him, right?
They'll settle.
So,
They'll settle, and Brock for president.
what's the
Yeah.
number they're going to settle for? You know, they want to make an example out of them. They lost the XRP case. Richard Hart's a big joke with Gucci and Burberry and Louis Vuitton nonsense, poking
And
fun
Prada,
at everybody, making us look really stupid. Don't they want to try to extract as much as possible? Like, usually in order to settle, one side has to be winning over the other. You know, it's a negotiation. It's a dance, as you say. So currently, except for the Hexicans, the crypto Twitter, and I'm betting crypto lobby people hate Richard Hart. They want him going down. The venture capitalists need to make all the money. They don't want a peer-to-peer group of, you know, what they look at as pirates getting rich and destabilizing society. So isn't it that they want to really stick it to him, and they're not going to only settle until Richard Hart starts striking victories? Or do you think out of the gate, $100 million settlement is on the table?
If they settle, it will be for a big number. The difference between Richard Hart and every other case that's been brought so far is he pulled a Ben.eth. He flaunted it in your face, right? That's the difference here. But Richard played the one thing that is not to his advantage, which made it possible in the first place, is he is the single point of failure. And that's evident through all the allegations as well. So it's a different kind of case than the other cases, because optically it includes greed. Optically it includes everything that the SEC has tried to use to make us be afraid of crypto, right? Most people, like Republicans, should be down with crypto. It makes goddamn sense. Like smaller government, you don't want people touching your money?
What if Richard goes in there and just shows receipts of him like buying all this shit with his Bitcoin he mined in 2015?
They don't give a shit.
Like you're talking about, though, Fidgetal, it definitely is a dance. But you know, Richard is he's definitely an interesting dancer for sure. Double entendre on that, in the way that he navigates the crypto space as well as dancing. I've seen some of his videos. One thing he's not very good at dancing with is apple cider vinegar and fruit flies.
I just wanted to say that the suit, it seems like the key word in it is alter ego. But alter ego is a synonym for breaking the corporate ceiling. That's how it's used in law.
What do you mean by alter ego in the case brought by the SEC against Richard Hart? It mentions the word alter ego.
Yes, it says that the way they're getting, the reason they named Hex and Pulse and Pulsex is they're saying Richard Hart is the alter ego for those entities. And therefore, the whole suit is against Richard Hart.
Oh, that's very interesting. I understand. You're basically saying that Hex and Pulsechain and Pulsex and whatever else are
alter egos for Richard is what they're saying.
Yeah, but so what Richard is going to say is that these are decentralized communities. And
well,
what they're saying is
you got to go more than that, because when you use that term in the law, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get people outside of the corporations, like owners, stockholders, everything else. But you have to prove there are elements. Whenever there's these kind of legal things, you have to prove certain elements. You have to prove that Richard Hart had control of the corporation, or control of the board of directors, or control of the bank account.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that, and this is what, interestingly, the SEC has not done yet, which I found strange. I thought that there would be at least one, Ethereum address or Bitcoin address, a bit string where of the account that controlled the money in the complaint, and we did not see that. Perhaps that's going to come in like the next set of documents that are released. But that's effectively their argument, is that they're claiming, and I'm surprised that we didn't see it, they have done the blockchain analysis and decided that this amount of money moved to this wallet, to that wallet, to this wallet, and it was effectively controlled by Richard Hart. And Richard Hart is the grandmaster of ceremonies, manipulating the prices up and down, making these claims, what have you. But we didn't see that in the complaint yet, and they will have to prove that in open court. And I think because that they didn't have it in the complaint, they have like a gut instinct that it is him, but I don't want to say this, but my instinct tells me that because it wasn't in the papers that were initially filed, they don't have the strongest case to tie Richard Hart, the individual, to these addresses that, moved Ethereum, stablecoin, Bitcoin, whatever around to manipulate the price of Hex or Pulse or whatever. So the fact that I love your point, actually. You're saying it's an alter ego. These things are Richard Hart, and he's the king conspiracy behind all this. He's the manipulator. He's doing the equivalent of cornering the silver market, which is a commodity, which people, if you corner a commodities market, you can get fined. You could actually go to prison for that. They're basically accusing him of that. And in order to do that, they have to show the blockchain investigation of wallets that shows that he's controlling that. And because that wasn't in the SEC initial complaint, I'm doubtful that they have the strongest case. I think they will be able to present some case, but I think it will have holes in it, potentially by, is it proper use of cryptography to properly make your data trail private, like GDPR style, essentially allows for privacy, the right to be forgotten. So did he use his perhaps he did do it, but why didn't they show that? Perhaps he is the alter ego, but why didn't they show that with, documented simple proof? Because the blockchain, very simple to track transactions. The proof should be simple. Let's see it, SEC. Let's see the proof. And if it is, perhaps you got them. But if it isn't, why didn't you show it? I really love that point you made there.
A lot of people don't like to show. It's all for show, but a lot of people don't like to show. But when Richard brings on the showmanship, it gets people going. So we're going to see.
No, I mean show as in essentially show us the 0x Ethereum addresses that the SEC alleges he used to manipulate the price of Hex. Perhaps he did do it. Perhaps he did not. That's for the court to decide. And in order to show them that he did do that, the blockchain would simply show, as a blockchain does, money was moved from here to here to here. These assets were bought and sold, because of the timing of it and who owns what. It was manipulation. But why weren't they able to essentially put in the complaint those addresses, essentially the blockchain Chainalysis investigation? There it is. I said the company's name that leads the world in blockchain investigations. Why can't they show the Chainalysis investigation of the funds moving from wallet to wallet to wallet, buying these assets? Why haven't they shown that yet if it was so slam dunk? That's my question.
For sure.
That's Silly Grandma. Excellent point. The alter ego. And why didn't they show that to us? And there are elements that they will have to prove. And I believe those are the elements that this is the trail of money. Bought and sold at these prices, at these times, moved it from this wallet to this wallet. But they just accuse that and they don't show the actual 0x addresses, which I find.
Yeah, they need to show it. And I guess I was just playing on the double entendre there with the word show.
I was hoping to get perhaps a point of a clarification, if you have anything to add on this, as to what is the standard of burden of proof on a case like this, because it's my understanding that it's different from criminal to private. So could you clarify that as to what is the standard of burden of proof?
Such a good question. So in criminal law, like Donald Trump indicted, whatever, in criminal law, you have to have the entire jury, all 12 people, generally it's 12 people, unanimously basically vote 12-0 that you're guilty, whatever your crime is. That's criminal law, right?
Beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, all that. This is civil law. So this is 51%, right? So you need to get 51%. Correct me if I'm wrong. Anybody feel free to come up and tell me I'm wrong.
Preponderance of evidence.
Correct. So this is civil law is 51%. So the SEC will have to show by a preponderance of the evidence, 51%, that he's guilty. Whereas criminal law is more like, I would say, 99%. This is 51%. And although it's much easier than criminal law, they risk going to a jury and losing. So no one ever wants to go to jury, because then you're just putting the fate of effectively whatever it is that's at stake in the hands of 12 strangers that could be a bunch of lunatics. You want to be defended by a jurisdiction that really respects large corporations. And in that is a whole spectrum of things that can occur. Unfortunately, the SEC has brought in suit in New York, which is a very anti-crypto place. But then you get an amazing decision by a judge in the XRP case that's very crypto friendly. So it could really go any which way. And imagine the SEC loses this case. The jury, for whatever reason, says Richard Hart is not guilty. Imagine what would happen in crypto land. So I think that would be the end of financial agency law forever. Like, you couldn't prove Ripple was guilty. You couldn't prove Coinbase was guilty. You couldn't prove Richard Hart was guilty. So not that these things have to happen, but the SEC has to imagine that world they basically destroy securities laws for every human ever, forever, because of this short period of time in history, this 3, 4 year, 5 year period of time in history where they couldn't win a case. And that sets precedent for the next 100 years. So if you're the SEC, you don't want to go to jury. You want to settle.
Glutathione. They won cripplingly with the library case right before the Ripple case.
Oh, yeah. But the library case, very, very small shitcoin, could not afford the legal bills. That's why they won, because Library was a shit coin that didn't have millions and millions to spend on legal. Ripple, Coinbase, hundreds of millions to spend on legal.
Glutathione, for some reason, they are asking for a jury trial. I don't know why, other than I'm imagining Richard being at his most ostentatious and they want to show that video, but they are demanding that.
Yeah. But to get to a jury trial takes years. The XRP case started in 2020 and it's 2023. Still hasn't even gotten to the jury. That was just a judge making a law. So that stuff, that's going to take forever. And the SEC has to weigh, Jesus, what if we lose to XRP, Coinbase, DCG, and, the most craziest of them all, Richard Hart. And now we have set case law for the next 100 years that anyone could be defrauded by anyone, crypto, bunch of scammers, bunch of pirates, fraudsters, manipulators, as Gensler said in that stupid video. They reign supreme. Their case law is now like indefensible. It's a renaissance. They're all the new billionaires. They could pay for whatever lawyer they want. It's a global take-all. It's literally what might be the end of society if Richard Hart wins this case. And they lost to XRP. And Richard Hart might have Richard Hart might be a billionaire,
So in other words, you're so an interesting way of saying that the request for a jury trial is really just a way to string this out and maybe get a judgment and settlement from Richard of some sort.
I don't think there's any way it doesn't settle, because the risk, they lost to... 75% chance, I believe, the XRP case won't be overturned. And that's not even my opinion. That's just based on the facts of the matter, is that 75% of cases on appeal are upheld. They're not rejected.
Okay.
So I just can't stress this enough. The SEC has to live in a world, because, anything could happen, string theory. We live in a world where this Twitter Spaces is not going on in parallel universe. So they have to explore the world. What if we lose every case because we're going against $2,000 an hour Manhattan lawyers that care so much and are exponentially better than our government lawyers who go home at 5 p.m. So what if they lose every single case and the world is taken over by crypto, and crypto billionaires have their own militias of drone armies?
But Richard Hart, he's really like a flamboyant guy. We know this, right? And he's been very consistent. He's been persistent. He's continued to get this crypto legislation and rules according to the SEC. He's kept it in his mind as he went along. As he talked about crypto, he taught the community about it. We know that. He has to win this. If he doesn't, then we lose too much for us. We need him to win this, because if he doesn't, then we lose too much. And the things that where crypto is headed requires that. He was very smart. He's on the right side of this. Richard Hart is about doing something big. And this community is also about doing something big. You were just talking about changing the world. I agree. That's exactly the kind of world I have a vision of myself. Absolutely, rest assured. The future lies in the human blockchain. That's what this is about, which is essentially the cryptocurrency represents, right?
The ideology and what Richard stands for, I think, is if he's able to put his own ego in the back seat, from my understanding, it definitely could have went a lot further, but also that ego made him. So it's interesting.
On that, Richard Hart is really the horse you rode in on. It could go either way, and because it could go either way, I think the government has a lot more to lose, which would then facilitate discussions of a settlement. And I think it's in everybody's best interest to settle, including Richard. I think it would be best for the community to then unlock the treasury. And that's the key thing. That's the key thing. The treasury needs to be unlocked for the community, allow the community to thrive, build things, make things better, permissionless, first principles of crypto all the way. And that's what would really kind of heal the whole situation. Litigation, no one ever wants to be in litigation. It could go on for years. Settle, unlock the
I
treasury.
disagree. Can I make a point? You can't just file a suit without any basis whatsoever. A lawyer has a legal due diligence requirement to put something in his complaint that shows a basis. So this can be dismissed very quickly with a motion to dismiss, because there's nothing in the complaint. There's no substance in the complaint whatsoever.
You're extremely wrong about that. I disagree with you like 110%. That's absurd.
Well, let me tell you how I'm seeing it.
200%.
You can't say that there's no substance in this complaint. Like, you cannot. People lost like lots of money. Pulsechain's 2 years late. The guy goes around, flaunts diamonds. Like, there is substance there.
Yeah,
No, that's
And the
not
argument
that's
is in the nuance.
innuendo. That's it. No, you have to have some factual substance. So this is fraud upon the court, okay? Which the lawyer who filed it could lose his law license over this. And let me explain this, okay? Just first with the hex and the pulse and the pulsex thing. There's no corporation. There's no foundation. There's no bank account. There's nothing that they can show that promises were made that we'd have profit, okay? Nothing. It's just a code. Hex is just a code. That's all it is, okay? And there's no back door. There's no way of controlling it.
Richard, listen, I think the Hex community is potentially a very powerful vehicle. But for you to say there's nothing there, Richard Hart has said so many times, 10,000x, 100x, whatever. Yes, maybe he qualified it in a sense of Ethereum's done a 10,000x, but he said Hex was designed to do a 10,000x. You know what? It did. And now he's saying that all my products are designed to do a 10,000x, and Pulse and Pulsechain or Pulsex are part of his product. So for you to say that there's no basis for anything, yeah, there's nuance to everything. So to say that this is fraud, like there's something happened here. All of crypto is illegal, and that's why Satoshi released it anonymously. You're not allowed to create currency to compete with the US dollar. They'll throw you in jail for that. They killed Gaddafi because he was the 10th richest man in the history of the world. Gaddafi. They killed him because they claimed he was a terrorist. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But more importantly, he tried to break the petrodollar and settle currency in euros and his own currency. So you can't do that.
What's interesting about Richard, though, is like, from my understanding and just the videos that I've watched on him, like it's not like he's just some like pipsqueak, he's hanging out with like Swedish lawmakers and he's hanging out with like people in parliament for all these other foreign countries. So it's not like he's just, a nobody. And I mean, it's just very interesting how the politics works. And I don't know how far his reach is, but hopefully he settles and everything kind of keeps going. But
so I think he's a top 100 to 1,000 holder of crypto worldwide. So when you have that much influence, and when you have that much money, you have a lot of power and potentially a lot of influence if you want to use it properly. It's very hard to raise money for charity. Everyone tries to do it. And this man was able to raise 27 million like it was nothing. Like, that's a very hard thing to do. I haven't seen too many $27 million donations out there. So this is potentially a force. But my point to silly grandmoms is that there's a crypto war that's been going on for almost 100 years with the cryptographers against the government. And for you to say that there's no claim in there, like, of course there's a claim. First of all, it's just illegal to make currency that competes with the US dollar, and they did it. Twitter went crazy when the SEC brought the case against Richard. They were like, see, he's a scammer, he's going to jail, it's all horrible, blah, blah, blah. And then the other side, Richard Hart did absolutely nothing wrong. I mean, obviously it's somewhere in the middle, right? There's some truth on both sides, and both sides have to live in the world where a jury made up of 12 crazy people can make up some crazy decision in which they can lose 12-0. And
they don't claim it's a currency in the complaint. You have to look at the complaint. The complaint has to be sufficient. There has to be something listed in the complaint. Otherwise, it can be dismissed as an insufficient complaint. All this generalization and nonsense means nothing. The words in the complaint.
Okay. So the words in the complaint show.
Grandma, take it easy, Grandma. Take it easy.
So there's how about this?
We're here together.
How about this? There's approximately $12 million missing from the sacrifice. They accused him of using $12 million to spend it on diamonds. But
they didn't accuse him of promising to use that money for profit for a pool of people. They did not say that 12 million or whatever, or 1,000, whatever was promised to be used for a pool of money from people who were expecting a profit from it. They don't claim that there was any promise.
Okay, so let me argue against you.
So it's an insufficient complaint.
Hold on.
You have to file a motion.
Grandma, come on, Grandma.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of passion, and I'm with you. Fuck yeah, I'm with you. But let's just take it easy here.
On the other side of that, they also do say that he talked about 10,000x gains and ROI. He did say those terms on video. He said ROI and 10,000x.
I think 38%, and 10,000x. That was a lot of the narrative that I was.
That's.
On, but it's tough because you can't teach people how to think, and I think that was a point earlier in the space you're kind of talking about. Just it's not illegal for people to sway people's perspectives. It happens in politics. It happens on television screen. It happens all over the place. You never know, and that's why I like. Anon Garrick's, where it's the mind is infinite and self-ruled, but that's just my ignorance speaking there.
I would agree with all you guys if it wasn't always grounded in this is what happened in the past. This is not a forward-looking statement, but every damn one of his statements that I could find always refers to the past and not a probabilistic, thing in the future. So
Well, that's our best way to keep time and keep track of things is the past.
You can't use it as a fishing expedition discovery. Okay, you have to have something in the complaint.
You literally can't.
The reality of the situation is that all the hundreds of thousands of people that sacrificed had expectation of profit, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't offer a token if it's a sacrifice, right? So anybody who says that they weren't expecting a profit is a freaking liar.
Skywalker, two things can be true at the same time. You could be sacrificing to put a permanent record on the blockchain for freedom of speech, and you could have a hope that if things work out, you might get something of value. And that is absolutely shown without any doubt by the fact that people chose to get less crypto if things worked out through the Sens Foundation. There's no question there were other motives.
That's a good perspective for sure, Danny. I never really thought about it like that, but there's a lot of different ways to play.
What are people's thoughts on the centralization of this? I mean, he has such a max supply. Like, what are your guys' thoughts on the theories behind him and his desires with the supply? I'm just dumbfounded by all of the people.
This wouldn't be a problem if he just didn't have like this origin address. Like if he just burnt that origin address from a hex perspective and not Pulse perspective, it'd be a lot different game.
100%.
I don't know.
100%. I'm curious.
Maybe
Satoshi,
can talk.
Satoshi had 100% ownership at the
Who's
beginning.
Who's Satoshi? Jack Levin's up here. I think he might. He's the closest guy I think I've seen to Satoshi.
That's funny.
That's just me.
That's funny. So Richard was probably thinking in the same way. I mean, that's how he was talking. That doesn't matter what the origin address does. If hex is so much money that it will dilute the origin address.
So let me just comment on this, because this is actually a really important point, the origin address. And this is, so look, right here, in the last 2 minutes, we have arguments on both sides of the origin address. And this is the key item that the SEC is going to have to show that Richard Hart controls. There's the real world, where O.J. Simpson obviously killed someone. And then there's the court of law, where magically he didn't kill someone. Wow. So they're going to have to prove by 51%.
The glove didn't fit. Come on.
That the glove fit. They're going to have to show that. So, and that's kind of the nuance of the argument. It's not, ABC 1, 2, 3, Richard Hart is bad, Richard Hart is good. Weapons grade cryptography can be used by terrorists to hold whatever amount of money to plan whatever bad event, or it could be done to protect against the overreach of the government, or it could just be done by a regular person to secure their Gmail account, and everything in between. And this is the nuance of the matter. And both parties, both the SEC, the Hexicans / Richard, are going to have to think about a world. And this is why it's 50-50, right? And I direct you to someone in the space who's not a Hexican and is very skeptical of everything and is a very sound mind of reason in a space that's fraught with, over-exuberance and insanity, is Nick Carter. And in one of Nick Carter's recent podcasts, he's a prominent VC in the space. I think his Castle Island Ventures on the Brink podcast. He talks about Richard Hart, and his co-host, who's kind of like this traditional finance guy who wears a suit. He's like, "Oh, this case is a slam dunk against Richard, right?" The standard crypto Twitter analysis. And Nick Carter, voice of reason, you would expect him to say, agree with Eric Wall and say this is all so horrible and Richard's a bad guy. You know what he said? He said, this is not such a slam dunk case, because when people gave him the money, they were essentially saying that he could do whatever they want with it, and he agreed to that. So the fact that someone like that, who's very buttoned up, as legit as it comes in this space, he's had, prominent exits, sold his data software company, someone like that is not saying this is a slam dunk case for the SEC, but is actually taking a nuanced approach, is kind of enough for me to see that there's something more going on here than Richard Hart's a bad guy. Maybe he controls the OA, maybe he doesn't. They'll have to prove that. Maybe he manipulated the price, maybe he didn't. They will have to prove that. And amazingly, if they have the evidence, it should be simple enough to prove by blockchain evidence. And this is where I draw you to the place in the lack of the place in the complaint, which is where kind of gives silly grandmas to her point. It doesn't show in the complaint that these are the addresses that were manipulated for the price to go up and down. We need to see that. And until we see that, I'm skeptical at best. About the SEC winning, and I think it's going to be closer to a settlement than people think.
I wanted to sort of clarify things from an attorney standpoint. Yeah, so the complaint isn't the place to assess the evidence or the charges against a particular individual, just speaking in general. A complaint just lays out a cause of action. It should lay out enough probable cause, or the basis for probable cause, for the accused crime or civil tort that's been alleged, and there's an opportunity for the defendant to respond with a motion to dismiss, or in California, demur. What a demur says is, I don't know where this action is, but I guess it's federal. Demur wouldn't apply, but the concept is sort of the same in federal law. If the complaint as alleged doesn't suffice to state cause of action under the elements of a particular tort, which I guess in this case would likely include fraud. I'm not quite sure what else it includes, but certainly there's a potential for fraud here based on the differing perspectives of what was said, what was represented, and actually what sort of control this person has, and what conduct is fraudulent in the view of the federal government. So Fidgetal's right, is that you really can, as long as you can get past a motion to dismiss, then discovery is a wide open book, and both sides have to comply with it. It might be a bad complaint, silly grandma, and it might not be substantiated later on, but the process allows for the continuation of a suit so long as there's a proper basis alleged but not yet proven.
Doc, let me ask you, when can we expect to see essentially the blockchain investigation analysis that the SEC is accusing that Richard Hart, recycled the ether, pumped the price, whatever?
Well, I think that would come, once witnesses start to take this. It's not normally the case where a defendant who learns of the government's discovery to go to the public, to sort of demonstrate to the public that they're innocent based on the evidence that they have, the exculpatory evidence that the government presents, and the condemning evidence that the government presents. I wonder if the government has a sort of expertise to present, testimony to accuse someone of blockchain, if that's an accurate sort of description of what you're talking about. I think that this is so confusing and can be so easily confused by people who understand it well, that I wonder what lawyers in the SEC that they have that are competent enough to prove something like this.
None.
So, well, hold on a second. What you do there is you farm out the investigation to a company called Chainalysis, who's hired by the U.S. government all the time. In fact, that's their number one client, is the U.S. government, to do blockchain analysis to essentially decipher, who owns what.
But when they bring in when either side brings in experts that are paid, those are easily, castigated. That's sort of the first thing you do, no matter, whether you're in criminal court or in civil court, irrespective of the claims. It's there. Each side will get experts to talk to the judge or the jury, and each side can be attacked because they're there because they're paid. But to the extent that one side or the other can prove that to the satisfaction of the judge or jury, that's something that's got to be tested in court in a particular case-by-case basis.
Right. So the beauty of the blockchain is basically look at it as a trail of red and green lights. And if all the green lights up and there's a 100% guaranteed trail from one wallet to another, to one asset to another, that's all very possible on a blockchain to do. All very interesting that you said that shouldn't be in the complaint, and you think it'll come out when witnesses start being deposed, and that may not happen for years from now.
I think you guys are confusing this case with a different case. They're not accusing him of Hex being a security, so you need to figure it out. Quit saying that. They're only accusing him of misallocating funds. So the fact that they wrote this on a paper and they're trying to sue him, it's actually a win for Hex, because they're kind of already declaring Hex not a security. You understand that, right? You can't say it's not a security, and then say, oh, by the way, you misallocated funds. If you misallocated funds, then it's already not a security.
And that leads to the question: misallocation of funds can still be a felony level offense. And say that does happen, where whatever happens, and he ends up going to jail or jury. If it gets that far, I think he's toast. You guys talk about that later. If jury appears will like even understand this shit, and if he's toast because of his character and whatnot, and what that does in your subconscious when you're judging a person. But say without Richard Hart, do you guys think Hex and PulseNet will survive? Like, do they need a Richard Hart to steer the wheel of the vehicle?
You need the Treasury, because the Treasury allows for experiments to happen that would otherwise never happen. You know, it allows for a renaissance to happen. It allows for Florence in Italy to occur. Something like Silicon Valley. Without the capital formation of Silicon Valley, what do you have? Just a bunch of nerds in garages? With the capital, you have, you know, everybody using semiconductors in their palms every day from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to sleep. The Treasury is tremendous. It's not like it's a few $1 million. It's in the hundreds of millions to potentially billions of dollars. So with the Treasury, the community has a potential renaissance on its hands. Without the Treasury, you know, we risk just being another dead layer one.
Yeah, but you kind of...
I would say 90% of the time, you know, I could be wrong. 90% of the time, if a criminal case is not brought in parallel with the SEC, a criminal case will probably not be brought.
Can they restrict his use of electronics? Because that could be like a term.
Yeah, but like, you know, the SEC tried silencing Elon Musk and having people review his tweets. Like, you could do anything, but if you don't have criminal jurisdiction, all right, come at me. I'm a wealthy guy, and you're gonna try to silence me. I don't know. You need access.
This is all saying that he's still a U.S. citizen. People don't even know if he revoked his citizenship and bought another one. Like he's been not in the United States for almost 10 years now.
He's got a lot of trading card passports for sure. It seems like, yeah, you never know. You never know.
He is definitely a U.S. citizen. I can confirm that.
Well, even if he wasn't a U.S. citizen, he'd still be entitled to the same rights of a citizen if he's present in the U.S. or under the purview of a U.S. court. So that's not an issue. As far as silencing him during the trial, a trial judge can do that. Can put an order on the court, the entire both parties from commenting. Particularly if it's going to affect the jury pool. A judge, won't want one part or the other, sort of making allegations about the case outside of court.
Doc, when could we expect to get in traditional litigation, if two private parties sue each other, one sues the other one has 30 days to answer the complaint. Does Richard Hart have to publicly file an answer to the complaint from the SEC? And if so, when? When's that deadline?
Yeah, so I don't work in federal practice, but generally speaking, there is a set period of time set by statute from which the party would have to respond. There's always the ability to go to the court and say, look, we need more time. But 30 days, I think, is probably a good guess. If it's not 30, it's almost entirely likely to be 60 days. So, but the court can do almost anything they want in as long as they protect the rights of both parties. They can craft any order they want and really control the motion practice in a case.
Is Richard's response due in the next, we'll call it 2 weeks to 60 days? Should we expect that to have substance in it? Or do you just think he'll deny, procedurally deny all the claims and save all the juice, as you said, for playing dirty later? So those are my two questions, sorry. And then I want to ask you about, how the government could play dirty.
Well, I guess it depends on what his attorneys view as the strength of their case and if they're going to move immediately to a motion to dismiss. In other words, I wouldn't offer any response beyond deny, and just a pro forma sort of response if you assume that the case has to go forward, based on your own interest, based on the evidence that you have, based on the likelihood of success that you could get the case dismissed almost immediately.
And what you said before about the government playing dirty, tell us more about that. And I think you said it had to do with when they released their evidence of, allegedly they accused Richard Hart of doing these bad things. So you said that they don't have to put those bad things necessarily in the complaint, but you're saying that there could be some drama that could unfold and the government could play dirty. Can you speak a little more about that and when we could expect to see their blockchain investigation of Richard doing the bad things that they accuse?
Well, since we're talking about the government, right, it's sort of hard because that's who the prosecutor is. It's sort of hard to isolate the potential misconduct that the government pursues in attacking its enemies. So while trying to respect your request not to be political, I'll simply say, look at the DC case that was set for trial today, less than a year away, and they have the government, the prosecution, has given Trump's attorneys 12 million pages of documents from which they could provide, bring evidence into testimony through a witness in court. So, reasonably speaking, that's not just. That's a perversion of a duty that prosecutors have not to participate in malicious prosecution. And I would categorize that particular conduct that way.
That Richard's going to say, listen, I don't control the OA. I didn't manipulate any of this, and you can't prove that I did. And then it's on the government to say, we hired the really special people from Chainalysis, and all this lines up that you manipulated all this, and you're a horrible person. So basically, you're saying that as far as playing dirty, what I mean to ask you is, when will the government have to show their hands? Assume that there's no secret evidence, whatever, and that this is all going to be open, and it's not going to be as absurdly political as the presidential election is. But it's more of just, kind of a pretty extreme case in crypto, but it's not as bad as that. And it's all about this blockchain investigation. When will the U.S. government, SEC, have to show their blockchain investigation of Richard Hart's alleged manipulation? When do you think that will come?
Not until after they've done their own discovery, that they've, they'll get a witness list from the government. They'll want to depose each of those witnesses. They'll ask each of those witnesses for documented for evidence from them to substantiate what they're claiming. I wouldn't expect this to be released, or the evidence presented concerning the blockchain, until well after they've started the active trial. And in federal court, that can take years, and usually does.
Wow.
And keep in mind that the process is the punishment as well. Because, let's assume that these accusations against Richard are not true, right? Putting him through this process, one, is damaging his name and reputation. Now, maybe that's reasonable. I don't know the case of Mr. Hart, but the process itself, having to hire a lawyer to spend the money for an attorney to be held off from publicly speaking, really because either it's in your own best interest or the court orders you to. All of this disrupts your business and your life in a way that is incalculably stressful. If you haven't been in a lawsuit, just a normal lawsuit, right, between parties, is extremely stressful and beats down most people. A federal prosecution, even a civil one, which is targeting his business and his reputation, his ability to earn money in the future, is a very hard thing to withstand, even if you're completely innocent.
So the difference here is that Richard has a lot of money, and not only that, but he has this unbelievable ego. I think he has prom king syndrome, and that's like you weren't the prom king in high school, so you got to be the prom king later in life, and you got to have everybody cheer you on. He's got a version of that.
He's the Donald Trump of crypto, as I say.
Yeah, which could be weaponized in a wonderful direction, like giving $27 million to the Sense Foundation. And, there's all sides to this.
People and also twerking and talking about his huge penis.
All that.
I think he's... So.
Are you talking about Trump or Richard Hart?
No, Richard Hart. Richard Hart the thing is, he's been right about a lot of stuff, but he is super annoying and has the worst crass personality. So
he's a good pole dancer, though. Shout out to Fresh and Fit.
I love and hate Richard at the same time.
Richard Hart's a wealthy guy, and what we've seen in crypto is the guys, the companies and nonprofits and people that don't have a lot of money to fight the government with litigation, they lose. Like the library credits case that was brought up earlier. I forgot who brought it up. I'm sorry. But that was a wonderful point. That library lost, but they lost because they didn't have the money to fight. Coinbase has the money to fight. XRP has the money to fight. DCG has the money to fight. But my point is when you're able to pay the $2,000 an hour lawyer, which before COVID, it used to be like $1,000, $1,200 an hour. Now I can't believe I'm even saying that there's $2,000 an hour lawyers. When you're able to pay those, what you're able to do is both substantively and intellectually, obviously make probably the strongest case you can make. But then also procedurally, you can get all your associates on the case. You can have your partners on the case. You could build up a storm. You could hold up you could hold up the government with procedural matters that otherwise would have never been brought. You could bring random constitutional cases. You could pay lobbyists to do crazy things. You could pay experts at top Ivy League institutions, legal scholars that are constitutional experts or securities matter experts. You could pay them to file amicus briefs. You can just go so hard on the matter. Library didn't pay that. They didn't have the money, and who shows, oh, I did all these things bad. I don't even think a government employee who gets a speeding ticket would say, oh, you got me. No one does that. You always challenge it. Right? And what my point is that if you have lots of money to challenge the government, you got a good shot. I think Richard has lots of money. Maybe he doesn't, but I think he does. And
well, it's easy. It's easier to play on the line when you have money, right? Because the line is in, right? So it's like Richard's definitely a habitual line player, and whether people say it's in or out, that's up for the legal process.
Keep in mind the government has unlimited money and unlimited resources and unlimited attorneys.
Whoa! No. Where I disagree with you is they're not incentivized to have unlimited resources. They're incentivized to collect their paycheck and go home at 5 or 6 o'clock.
Well,
whereas the $2,000 an hour lawyers are incentivized to have a ridiculous penthouse in Manhattan and make $5 million a year. That's the difference.
Well, the guys that you're talking about that get the $2,000 an hour, hourly rate, those are almost entirely former SEC employees and attorneys for the SEC. They flip right around. They have friends on the inside. That's how these guys are really effective. It's because of their relationships, not because of their stellar legal theories that blindly allow juries and judges to kiss their feet. Again, FTX supposedly is spending $1.5 million a day defending right now. They can't cripple anybody, no matter how much money they have. Now, I don't know the particulars on Richard Hart's case, but the SEC coming after you, I know something about this. I don't litigate, but I'm a registered arbitrator with FINRA, with the Financial Industries Regulatory Authority, where all of the cases about fraud from brokers comes to first before they go to court. So I've seen quite a bit, and people should rightly fear the power of our government turned against someone that they're trying to attack.
So what do you think the proper budget is? 10 million? 20 million? It's not a criminal case yet, mind you. This is a civil case.
Well, they could turn it around and make it a criminal case.
No. I don't want to speculate on that matter. Doc, the budget to give yourself the best defense, 10 million, 20 million, I think that's in the realm of what Richard can pay.
Yeah, I think that I just don't know enough about the case to give you an estimate that I would want you to repeat anywhere else. It's certainly in the millions, and maybe
we're not dealing with a normal person here. We're dealing with potentially a billionaire. We're dealing with
big peepee. Yeah,
we're dealing with someone who has the biggest ego you've ever seen, that wants to be enshrined in the history of the crypto wars. Alan Turing, Phil Zimmerman, Hal Finney, Vitalik Buterin, CZ Binance, Richard Hart. Like, that's how he wants to see it. Like, this is a certified, situation for the highest of stakes, pun intended, and he's potentially a billionaire. So,
right. Well, if he beats the government, that's going to add to his cachet, right? So, yeah, he's apparently motivated to do that, not just in effect to enhance his ego, is what you're saying, but also to protect his business.
I just wanted to point this out, but isn't the whole purpose of the SEC is to regulate anyone that's acting in a third party or fiduciary capability? So I don't see why they have jurisdiction in crypto, right? If we're talking about fair crypto.
Yeah, they really don't. Yeah, but they're trying, right?
Well, hold on a second. I have to push back. I have to, vehemently disagree that this is a highly nuanced. I mean, for you to say that securities fraud has never happened in the history of crypto, I think is outrageous. I could point to endless amount of projects are just literally straight up fraud. Now, that doesn't mean that this one is or everyone is, but to say that they have absolutely no jurisdiction, come on.
No, obviously you're right. There's nuances in it, but all I'm trying to point out, if the project is done properly, right? Why is Bitcoin considered a commodity than opposed to a security?
Well,
because there's no
that
founder.
took a decade for that to
Yeah,
happen.
but
I would
yeah,
actually argue that when Bitcoin was first launched, it was obviously a security. It was controlled by a very small group of people that were kind of putting stuff out there and making stuff happen. And without them, the project would have went to zero. So
yeah, but no, you're totally right. I agree with you. I'm just saying that there's nuances, right? You have to look at if this company, like let's say for instance, we're talking about Richard Hart. If Richard Hart act in some type of fiduciary capacity and he misappropriated funds, yes, we're talking about a security. Then there is some violation there, which actually they have jurisdiction. So all I'm just pointing out, just depending on the project of how, like what Simple just mentioned, if it's fair crypto, it passed the Howey test. If it's peer-to-peer transaction, there isn't any third parties involved in it, then where does the SEC come in to regulate? There isn't. So that's all I just wanted to point out.
yeah, I mean, the reason why they went after him is because he was flashing all, the Louis Vuitton bags, the biggest diamond, the world's biggest PP, and $1 billion was raised.
Yeah,
There's
but
so
Tim,
that's
many.
did you
presumption, right?
Cluthon? Did you see his PP? You didn't see his PP, right?
No,
No,
But
never.
you're not
But
that
but a lot
smart.
of but in all due respect, isn't that's all based on presumption? Like they just put a case out on him, and for like if you're looking at a defense, he can countersue based on malicious like prosecution
yeah,
if they
yeah,
can't
yeah,
prove
all
anything.
that. But you don't want to sue the government. That usually doesn't work out so well. But
Then they
to
handle
your
through arbitration, right? What are the remedies? What are the
to your
remedies you
point,
can take?
to your point, the government also has to live in the world where they lose. And that's kind of where I think that a settlement is best for everybody involved. Because, I said it earlier on this spaces. Imagine the US government loses to Richard Hart. That would be the end of the world. There would be open season on everything crypto. Crypto, Bitcoin probably goes to some outrageous number. And the world is destabilized, and the crypto people, the pirates, are now in control for the next 100 years. You have random billionaires of lunatics everywhere, not guys in suits on television, but crazy people wielding war chests of hundreds of millions of dollars that could do whatever they want, that could take on the FDA, that could have their own militias, drone armies, anti-drone armies, their own GPT-5s, their own GPT-6s, private. So imagine they lose. So they have to live in that world where they might lose, and which means they probably have to settle. And this
So
is going to be go on
the
for
future is
years.
integrity, I think, at the core level of all this, and even the reason why we're having this conversation in and of itself. It's like, you know, if he was acting integral, Richard, which hey, I'm no one to judge, but if integrity was the core of his offering and what he was bringing to the marketplace, then there would probably be no problems, and there'd probably be more advancement inside the crypto sphere. I will say Richard Hart is a genius. Whether people want to, call him that or not, he is. But you can pay for school, but you can't buy class. And there's certain ways that he could have conducted himself in a more classy manner, from my perspective, and
Yeah,
just
but
been about growing the
The
crypto
funny
world at
thing,
large.
the funny thing about this is Richard Hart only put on that like stupid. What did he call it?
I want the top hat, Richard Hart. That's what I want.
But he
Fringe
only changed.
campaign.
He only changed because he needed to play the bad character for the movie, right? Like he only did all that shit just to be in the movie.
So he's like
Like,
Anakin Skywalker, kind of in a way.
yeah, he just had to play a role in a movie, and
yeah.
he was like, "Oh, I got to go buy a bunch of shit and look like a badass or like a villain for my movie," and now obviously like he's not doing it because the movie's done. So it's like,
Whoever the writers are for this movie, inside the movies, they're good writers. That's all I'll say about that.
I have a question for Doc. I'm curious, some of the subpoenas that are going out to, the subpoenas that are going out to community members in the Hex community, it says it's kind of like coming up like a John Doe versus Richard Hart. Why isn't there like an identified person or entity that is like identified as being harmed or has been harmed? I'm just curious about that.
So it probably means the SEC believes that individuals have been harmed for other reasons without identifying the individual yet. They can bring the complaint as under a doctrine called respondent superior, that they have because they're involved in the regulatory and protecting the public from regulatory abuses or security abuses. that they probably have. That what that means to me is they probably haven't found someone who's been directly harmed by this conduct. So that's why they're identifying as a DOE. DOE defendants is a practice both in federal and at least California state courts. When you believe that a party is responsible, but you haven't been able to identify them in that particular responsibility, then you name them as DOEs. And most complaints will name DOEs 1 through 100, and then through discovery, you'll find out people that are either culpable or have been harmed. And that's when a plaintiff or a defendant DOE would then be named later on once they have that. So the fact that that's the case, that's the way they're sending these subpoenas out, it's an indication of the weakness of their case, in my opinion, that they're just surfing. So it's interesting. I really do need to look into the case more to comment, further these sorts of questions, honestly.
Thank you. That's absolutely fascinating. I I really appreciate that very clear cut answer. And yeah, that's basically what's going on. And what's frustrating is, even though it's not looked at this way, I know from people who come from a statist view, if you don't, I guess the first subpoena like that'll come to you will come in like an invitation type format. If you look them up to any of the case numbers of the Hex community members that received them, they've been John Doe versus Richard Hart Schuler, right? What's interesting is if they're not answered and they don't show up, cops come and then they bring you forcibly by guns and they jail you. And I think that that's really important to know, that people have actually gone to jail at this point in time for now what has not been even identified as someone who's been has had a crime committed against them or their property, and people are spending nights in jail. So it just look at the justice system. I appreciate the time to contribute. Thank you again for the answer.
Thione, you were asking about what sort of conduct would represent an abusive process. I would say that this conduct, as young lady has described it, is a very abusive.
I'm pushing back on that. If anyone went to jail over Hex, I think we'd hear about it. If you're
real quick, just want to put this out there. One of the community members that's in one of the crypto groups that I'm in. He's got a big name and he likes the color green, as we all like green. He put out there that he got locked up and was released.
Yeah, I think that was Trayvon you're referring to. I think
Yeah,
that was
it might not
Trayvon.
be. Yeah,
I think it was Trayvon you're referring to, and I don't think it was over. I don't know.
It was. He
I
has a
saw
video,
on the
Glutathione,
internet.
just to help you out. He does have a video of the actual cop coming and explaining what happened. So it was because he did not respond properly to the second invitation, so to speak. He understood the first to be an invitation when he didn't show up, and he missed the court date. That's why they came and they jailed him. And they put him in jail for 2 days.
Yeah, contempt of court. You can't. The court has identified you and your address, even though if you're John Doe, you decide to just say fuck it. Yeah, they're gonna come get you.
Is that a Trayvon video on Twitter?
Yeah.
I think
not on Twitter. I think on his YouTube channel, and he shows the video of the cop, and then he also gives the case number and all that other stuff.
I would like to say, if Richard attaches chain analysis to the motion to dismiss, that shows that the OA did not use any money for his extravagance or crashing the market, that would put water on this SEC case, and it could be dismissed.
I like it. Silly grandma, you're hired.
Sold.